Welcome to the Faculty Forum Online, a program of the MIT Alumni Association. I'm Judy Cole, and I'm the EVP and CEO of the Alumni Association, and I will serve as moderator today. If you wish to ask a question, please enter your first name, your location, and the question in the form on your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as we can today, but we may have to aggregate some of them. Our guest today is Ramesh Raskar, the NEC Career Development Professor of Media Arts and Sciences at the Media Lab. Ramesh co-directs the lab's Center for Future Storytelling, and he is the head of its Camera Culture Group. His research focuses on computational photography and human-computer interaction. Some of his recent projects, figuring out how to remove blurry spots from a photograph after the fact, creating an eye test device to detect cataracts with a smartphone, and using crowdsourced photography and intelligence to prevent chaos among masses of pilgrims in his native India. Professor Raskar, thank you for joining us today. Can you start by providing us with an overview of your current research at the MIT Media Lab?
Thank you, Judy, and great to be here and spending time with MIT alums. I travel all over the world meeting our community, and it's great to have a platform to share some of the exciting things we're doing at MIT. My group at MIT Media Lab is called Camera Culture, and our passion is to make invisible visible inside our bodies, around us, and online. So, for example, we are building screens that can that look blurry, which are prescription glasses, and we can put your prescription on those tablets or on those screens so that they become sharp. So you don't have to wear your prescription glasses anymore.
Sort of like getting prescription snorkeling goggles.
Exactly. And so once you have that, the rest of the world will still look blurred to you, but your tablet or phone or screen will look sharp. So why can't our devices have prescription built into that? So we call it vision correcting displays. So that's a big effort for us.
Would be great if you could get that built into automobile windshields also.
That'll be great. So you don't have to worry about fiddling with your prescription glasses, or you could be, reading your favorite book on your tablet and fall asleep without having to worry about, wearing your prescription glasses on top. Or in developing countries where often people share screens but cannot afford prescription glasses, the screens can themselves have prescription built into it. And of course, the device is it's a common hardware, and you can dial the prescription in software. So the different people with different prescription can use the same device and just in software dial in their prescription.
Very cool.
So that's very exciting for us. We're also looking at making the invisible visible when you're driving. So when you have, how can you build a car that can drive through fog, that allows you to drive through fog as if it's a sunny day? And for that, we are creating very fast time of flight imaging that sends light into the scene and measures what's out there, and then creates a picture to your naked eye on the dashboard, a very, very sharp image of what's out there, whether it's nighttime, foggy, rainy, and so on. And we are also building solutions to read a book without opening it page by page. And how can we read a book without opening it? We use different electromagnetic spectrum. It's very difficult for light to penetrate through a book. So we use terahertz imaging. And the challenge, of course, is that the pages are only about 20 micrometers, half the width of a human hair. And so as we read these pages, we need very, very fine resolution in the Z dimension. And clearly, the various pages are the text on various pages is going to occlude each other. So although we can penetrate sufficiently through various pages, we have to figure out how this partial occlusions of text, in presence of that, how can we resolve it? And we cannot use X-rays for that because there's no contrast between ink and paper and air. In terahertz, there is some contrast, but it's very, very weak. So we have solved all this set of problems to see how we can read through a book. And you can imagine it's useful for, we are working with the Met, and they have thousands and thousands of texts in various museums, scrolls that cannot be opened because they're too fragile. And so we would like to make all that information ancient and locked away, available to us. And of course, there are many other applications for that type of reading through a book. And then we are also looking at creating health solutions. So FLIM, F-L-I-M, is fluorescence lifetime imaging. And if you have a circulating tumor cell in the body, then we can figure out if the cell is cancerous or not by measuring a fluorophore lifetime. You tag a fluorophore, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we want to measure, what's the rate at which the intensity from the fluorophore is changing. Of course, that's happening very fast, at nanoseconds, at billionth of a second. So the traditional equipment used for this are very expensive. They cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But now we have shown, we just had a Nature subjournal paper come out that showed that we can use this at a very reduced cost. And in the future, you might have something that looks like a blood pressure cuff, and you can put your arm in there and see if you have, tumor cells that are floating around in your body. So again, we want to make the invisible visible inside us as well.
It's a little scary, actually. I'm sure I want to see cancer cells floating around in my body.
Hey, if you can detect that, in advance. Reading through a book is a little bit scary because you can also read through your envelopes without opening them.
Oh, yes.
So that's a little bit scary. Although who sends letters anyway nowadays? But if you can detect cell properties without doing a biopsy or without even doing a blood test, that would be very, very powerful. And talking about health, another project that you mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction, is how can we create solutions that can be used by people in remote parts of the world that are simply attachments to mobile phones. In this case, a health solution to get prescription for your eyeglasses. And a little bit later, hopefully, we can talk about a company that we have spun out called iNetra that is bringing some solutions in the US, in Europe, and also other parts of the world. So that's a quick overview of some of the things we are doing in our group.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ramesh. Questions are starting to come in from the live audience, but first allow me to ask one or two of my own. Can you tell us more about Kumbhathon, the experiment to improve pilgrimage planning that you spearheaded in Nashik, India this past summer?
Oh, fantastic. So this has been kind of part of my life for the last 2 years or so. So I'm originally from Nashik, which is a city very close to Bombay, and I grew up in a very modest background. All my relatives are farmers. So I was one of the first ones to actually leave the town for education. And when I go back, I realized that technology and innovation and access to global resources have transformed these cities, non-metro cities. Nevertheless, when it comes to something as massive as Kumbh Mela, which is this massive, beautiful, colorful pilgrimage, about 30 million people show up for 30 days.
Wow.
So it's 2 New York cities, cramming in one tiny town, which has a population of about 2 million. And so, of course, the government does an extremely good job in providing basic resources, such as, health by the paramedics, police for security, widening the roads, and so on. Nevertheless, we felt that there's a need to think about how can innovation make this extremely tech savvy. When it comes to finance and food and transportation and so on. So we wanted to take a piece of MIT to Kumbh Mela. And so about 2 years ago, we started this initiative called MIT Kumbhathon. And many MIT researchers over the last 2 years traveled with us to study many issues, whether it's civic issues, whether it's education, translation, health, sanitation, water quality, and so on. And they have worked with us over the last 2 years to see what are some opportunities to influence the Kumbh Mela. Not just study it, but actually influence the Kumbh Mela. We are engineers at MIT. We want to do something about it, not just study it. So what has been very heartening is that over time, the government officials, as well as the city business leaders, educational leaders, all got behind MIT Kumbhathon. And a lot of MIT alums in India and worldwide got behind it. And we worked very closely with the government to deploy various solutions. And for example, one of the biggest challenges is mapping crowds. And the traditional ways to map crowds is by doing some kind of feet on the ground, like have people counting with counters, create some barricades, have some TV monitors and things like that. But we completely changed that game, and we said, why don't we use a new technology that allows us to see the crowds moving through the city, almost like a Terminator movie. And the way we did that is by using cell phone towers. Now, as you know, a cell phone tower knows you that you are in its zone. So a given cell phone tower knows the number of subscribers in its vicinity. And so we managed to convince all the telecom carriers in the Nashik city, working with the government, of course, to provide us real-time data of number of subscribers for each tower. And it took a lot of time to convince them to do that because they were not, first of all, set up to provide such data. So, and even if they did, there were a lot of translation issues because everybody had different formats. There is no standard around it. So we deployed a lot of innovators, local innovators. In fact, we trained them, we coached them, and we deployed a lot of innovators to sit and work with these telecom carriers to provide this data in real time. And during this particular Kumbh Mela then, we were able to show live movement of crowds through the city. And of course, we shared that with the government authorities so they could plan everything. They could plan for, are there any hotspots? For example, is the railway station or the bus station seeing an excessive crowd? Do they need to deploy more buses to ferry people? Two, less critical, but less dangerous, but more, still critical issues like where should you put more sanitation pods and so on. So all this information was possible.
I'm trying to imagine what this visual looked like. Was it a photograph of the crowds, or was it some sort of animation of the swelling of the crowds in different areas?
Yeah, it's more like watching the hurricane come on shore. You can see the maps of the hurricane, so it's like a weather map.
Okay.
But instead of a weather movement, this is crowd movement. So that was very fascinating because we took this MIT Kumbhathon platform in many ways. Here's a picture of the Kumbh itself, which is the pilgrimage site. And this is the story from a Wall Street Journal, which realized that because MIT is involved, it's not just a solution for Kumbh Mela, which is a kind of a transitory event, but in fact, it's innovation that can be used in many ways to build smarter cities. So in fact, this picture shows the pilgrimage site, and I was there myself. It's a very surreal moment because for the last 2 years, we are all talking about technology and innovation and entrepreneurship and algorithms and machine learning. But when you're at this moment, in the middle of the pilgrimage site, everything fades away, and you just realize the beauty and the spirituality of this event. So it was very surreal. I encourage everybody to go to the next Kumbh Mela. It's very well organized. It's beautifully crafted, and thanks to innovation, it's actually tech savvy and actually can have an impact on the local society as well. So fast forward next week at MIT Media Lab, we have all the officials from Kumbh Mela coming to MIT to first of all celebrate the success of this Kumbh Mela, which was done with zero incidences. No individuals lost. No deaths because of medical or health or stampede issues, and hundreds of innovators and hundreds of entrepreneurs created because of these masses. Many of them in collaboration with MIT, but others kind of inspired by what we are doing. So next week, many of these officials are coming to MIT on October 27th, and we have a day called Kumbh at MIT, Kumbh Mela at MIT. And also we have a lot of other officials, such as Boston City government and the governor's office, and of course MIT officials also participating in, first of all, celebrating what was done at Kumbh Mela through MIT efforts, but also moving forward, how can we take the MIT innovations to such places, but more importantly, what can we learn from those places at MIT? Because at MIT, we want to be at the leading edge of making an impact on the world population. And the next 5 billion people who are going to come online and live a digital lifestyle are fortunately or unfortunately not in Boston, right?
Yes.
So to reach out to those 5 billion people at MIT, we have to go out there. And we have to be exposing our students, our researchers, our collaborators, our sponsors to the most amazing opportunities, most amazing challenges that are out there. So Kumbhathon now has become actually a gateway for many of our collaborators and sponsors to go to Nasik and look at all these great challenges. So we are opening an innovation center in collaboration with our group. And it's a resource that's available, of course, to any MIT individual, but also open to many others that are very passionate about how can we solve problems for billions of people, which are also could be billion-dollar opportunities at the same time.
That's fabulous. So are these officials coming all that way just for the one day, or are they going to stay for the 30th anniversary of the Media Lab next week?
Yes, so you're right. So it's coordinated with the 30th anniversary of the Media Lab. And as you know, the first 30 years of the Media Lab have been amazing. You know, Media Lab has invented, you know, the e-book for in your Kindle reader, you know, has invented, you know, the video compression, hundreds of things. But I think the next 30 years of the Media Lab, in my opinion, are going to be about getting out of the Media Lab.
Yes.
You know, and the whole lab, so whole world is our lab now at MIT. And so I think the next 30 years, I feel Media Lab has an opportunity, MIT in general, but specifically Media Lab, which is always very human-centric, building is always very human-centric technology, has the potential to go and be out there, be in Kenya, be in Brazil, you know, be in Detroit, you know, be in Italy, be in places that are going through huge transformations, and use that as an opportunity to take research at MIT out there, but also bring those ideas back to MIT. So to answer your question, the officials are of course coming here for part of that celebration, but each of these officials have asked us to see if they can engage with Boston ecosystem or American ecosystem for innovation. So they want to see what are the latest solutions in water management or green technologies or new smart grid energy technologies and so on. And so they're going to meet various Boston city officials, but also going to visit certain companies in Boston areas to see how they can be partners in building the next generation of smart cities in their own cities.
Fabulous. I'm going to change direction just a little bit here and ask you about something that I saw in your TED Talk. In your TED Global Talk, you described how femto photography might help us take photographs of objects around corners. What applications of this technology are emerging from your group or from others around the world?
Great. So about when I was starting at Media Lab, let's see if I can bring up femto photography. All right, on the screen. When I was starting at the Media Lab, just before that, I said, I want to do something crazy when I go into MIT. So I wrote a very detailed NSF proposal, even before I started, about how the world will look if we can image it extremely, extremely fast. You know, not a million or a billion, but 1 trillion frames per second. And I and my collaborator wrote down a whole bunch of ideas on what we could do. And I was very green, you know, I had not even started as a faculty. So you can imagine what happened to my NSF proposal. It was rejected, but it was still a good effort. And as soon as I started at MIT, I started, even before actually that, I started talking to collaborators, potential collaborators all over the world to see if they can help me build solutions to do that. So my TED Talk, which happened, I think, in about 3 years ago, was based on a Nature subjournal paper that we had published on a camera that can see around corners. And Judy, if I want to see what's behind you, you know, without moving the camera behind you, how can I do that? The idea is I'm going to shine light on the floor behind you, and that light will bounce from the floor and hit the back of your jacket. Part of that light will go back to the floor and then back to my camera. By analyzing these multiple bounces of light, I can actually see around corners. I can see what's behind you, right? And of course, to do this particular process of looking around corners, we need a camera, as I said, that runs extremely, extremely fast. So let me show this movie because it's kind of a fascinating way to understand what I'm talking about. And what happens in this movie, the movie is already playing now. You see a pulse of light that's being shown through this Coke bottle, and you see this light particles or photons propagating through the bottle, and a lot of that hits the cap of the bottle and starts scattering. Meanwhile, on the table, you see this energy wavefronts propagating. At the top, you see air pocket that's there, and the light is bouncing around inside that. And after several picoseconds, you see at the back of the Coke bottle, light kind of concentrating because of the parabolic curvature of that bottle. So if you can play the movie one more time, let's do that. Okay, the movie is playing now. So again, Judy, as you'll see, the light is going through the bottle. There's some milky water in it. It's already kind of leaking out on the table. The energy fronts are propagating as if you're thrown a stone in a pond of water. You see that energy front ripples moving through. Light trapped in the bubble up there, bouncing around. And then again, the focus light at the back of the bottle.
So we're seeing this in slow motion. How long did that take in real time?
So I should clarify that. That's a good question. So light takes only about 1 nanosecond, about 1 billionth of a second, to go about the length of the Coke bottle, about 1 foot. Unfortunately, although our device can in fact record things at roughly 1 trillion frames per second, you can imagine that at such a short exposure time, it's completely dark. I mean, it's like taking a picture, at a dinner with your cell phone camera. You don't see anything.
Right.
So each frame would look very, very dark. So what we do is we actually take the same picture again and again and again, about 10 million times. And we average all those pictures so that we can get some good signal to noise ratio. We can start seeing the photons. So in fact, to record this picture, we have to take 10 million times the 300 frames I just showed you. So that takes about an hour to capture that data set.
Okay.
And then we, of course, play it back in a matter of 10 seconds. But the actual virtual event takes place just in a matter of about a nanosecond. And that's why we say that although we are slowing it down, this movie, by 10 billion times, it's the world's fastest, slowest movie. It's the fastest movie because you see a very fast phenomena, but took us about an hour to capture that. And so but there's no special effects here other than superimposing the photo of the Coke bottle, which did not sponsor this research, by the way.
Maybe they will now.
They will, and actually the guys from Pepsi called us saying, hey, why didn't you use the Pepsi bottle?
You said, well, do you want to sponsor it?
What's fascinating about this, just to kind of tell you about my TED Talk, is that this particular solution now, which we call femtophotography, extremely fast photography, can be used in very unique ways. We can build a camera that can see around corners that I showed you, and that uses multiple bounces of light to record that. So this is a very exciting research.
So before we go to the audience questions, I just want to ask you to quickly say a little bit about.
Can I take 1 minute to just tell you a few applications?
Oh,
because a lot of our viewers might be interested in, what is this for? Because that's the question I got when I started as a faculty member at MIT, and I said, hey guys, I want to build this camera that can see around corners and run at trillions frames per second, and they just thought I'm crazy, and some well-meaning people came to me and said, Ramesh, get your tenure and then think about doing these crazy projects. I said, no, this is why I came to MIT. I want to do crazy stuff on day one. And I have been very fortunate with my team, especially Andreas Welten, who was my postdoc, who worked on this. And he even got the MIT TR35 award for this work and is now a scientist at Wisconsin. So I got a really good team members like him and other collaborators from Harvard, Rice University, from Spain, from UK, who all participated in this very massive project to build it together. So, where is this useful for? We can build endoscopes, as you see on the screen. We can see endoscopes that can see deep inside the body without having to explore them one location at a time. We can build cars that can avoid collision of what's around the bend, or drones, as you can imagine, that can avoid collisions with other drones flying mid-air around corners. We can look for survivors in hazardous conditions by shining light through open windows and see if there's any movement by looking at reflected signatures. And and so on. So there are a lot of opportunities in how we might be able to use extremely fast imaging to redefine what we mean by a camera. I mean, a camera that can see around corners shouldn't be called a camera anymore, because camera comes from the word camera obscura, which was a hole in the wall, literally, that projected an image on the other wall, during Renaissance. And somehow we dropped the word obscura and just get camera, but camera means a room that obscures. But the camera that we're talking about is not creating imaging through shadows or lenses. It's creating images through time of flight. It's actually exploiting the fact that just like sound, which takes time to arrive from the source to our ears, light also takes finite amount of time to travel. And so we're exploiting this extremely high speed of light to create images. And as I said, it's not just science fiction anymore. We are able to create benchtop experiments. Of course, a lot of data is available for other researchers. And many other teams all over the world have started replicating our results now and started building new applications that we ourselves did not imagine in the front. And very recently, DARPA announced a $27 million project called REVEAL to look at how can we use this type of technology to look around corners. So I feel like from the day I started at MIT about 7 years ago to now, this whole concept of how can we use extremely fast imaging to look around corners and redefine a camera has matured over time. But I think, as you can imagine, it's just the beginning. I'm very excited of where we can go with this.
It could be used as an early warning system also for collisions. I mean, not just for cars, but I'm thinking like airplanes and things like that.
That's a great point, because especially when you're in foggy environments and you're
in a cloud and you don't see another plane.
Absolutely.
Like
so you have we're talking about delivery vehicles that will have very lightweight electronics on them and deliver them. If they can start avoiding collision, and we can create air lanes that are literally a few feet above the ground for us, that start delivering medicine and your Amazon deliveries and your favorite clothing for the Halloween because everybody's late ordering them. I can imagine a whole bunch of applications in collision avoidance, planning, navigation, and so on.
So quickly, before we run out of time, I want to get you to talk just a little bit about iNitra.
Yes.
The company that you founded, whose motto is, I care for 2.4 billion in need.
Absolutely. So in fact, today's homepage, as you know, mit.edu, I was pleasantly surprised to wake up this morning to see my picture on the mit.edu homepage about a company that we spun out some time ago. And let me show you what this company does. So, so if you can zoom in on the screen, actually. So this is a Snap-on eyepiece, right, that you just insert a cell phone in it. And you look through this, use the dials at the top, click on a few buttons, and click OK, and it gives you a prescription for your eyeglasses, your nearsightedness, farsightedness, and astigmatism. And as a bonus, can also scan for your cataracts. And so this has been spun out as a venture from my group.
Does it really work?
iNitra.com. Right now it's off, but we're happy to
I was gonna try it.
check this out. And so, as you can see, this device itself is very clever. It has some prisms and masks and colors and so on. But it's very elegant in that sense. And all the intelligence is actually built into the software.
Oh, it's very lightweight.
It's very lightweight. There are hardly any mechanically moving parts. Yeah. And all the intelligence is built into the phone. And so we think this is a very useful solution to provide eyeglasses. There are 300 million people worldwide who need glasses but don't wear them. So you might think that's happening only in developing countries, but even in the US, 10% of children who are diagnosed as having learning disabilities are eventually referred, eventually it's figured out, the only thing they need is the correct prescription. So it's a huge problem for education, for livelihood, even in the US. And if you talk to the American Association of Optometrists and organizations like that, they have shown that this is a huge need in US and Europe as well, because people are not very compliant about going for their prescription test, for that. So there's a huge opportunity to take this out there. So I'm very glad that this has gone out to thousands of people. The company has done about 40,000 prescriptions already. And the reason why we are on the homepage today of MIT is about this, but on a slightly related note. It turns out that when you're using virtual reality headsets, like Oculus Rift or the Sony Morpheus that's coming out, or the Google Cardboard VR, it turns out people without prescription glasses can enjoy the virtual reality headset, and enjoy the content, but people with prescription frames, like yourself, Judy,
cannot.
It's very difficult for you to actually appreciate virtual reality because your prescription frames get in the way of the virtual reality headsets. More importantly, in a virtual reality headset, the field of view is very important. So you want like a 120-degree field of view in virtual reality, but your prescription frames don't allow you to do that. They limit your field of view because they have been built mostly for reading or driving or just looking at what's in front of you. It's not created for peripheral vision. And so virtual reality headset can be very limiting for that. And as you know, virtual reality is useful not only for games, but it'll be useful for education, for rehabilitation, and many causes going forward, virtual tourism, and so on. And so we think about 40% of the world population, including the US, who needs prescription glasses, will not be able to use virtual reality. So we think iNetra now has the opportunity to, in fact, not only solve the prescription glasses problem, but also solve the problem of bringing virtual reality, which I consider the next platform for personal computing, to the masses. So it's a very exciting opportunity. We are getting a lot of inbound interest from various virtual reality companies and investors and content creators of how can we use these solutions to bring virtual reality to the masses who, and as I said, 40% of people will not be able to appreciate virtual reality otherwise.
I think I have mixed emotions about virtual reality. I sort of want to enjoy reality.
Yeah, which is very true. I think the branding needs to change because it's not about virtual reality. It's about bringing digital interface to other physical worlds, right? Things that you cannot appreciate otherwise. Whether you are a doctor who wants to operate on a patient, or you want to buy your new house, or you're a student who want to learn about anatomy and you want to see very immersive information. You're a car designer and you want to design new features. So for all these tasks, virtual reality is going to be a very important player. So it's not just for gaming.
It's actually a way of viewing the world, the real world.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So now, Jonathan in Portland has asked, how does book imaging with light differ from conventional medical imaging? Might there be new medical applications?
Yes. So, Jonathan, when we think about how you read through a book, we are using terahertz imaging. And the reason we use that is we want to see pages that are down to 20 micrometers. And so terahertz have been used for industrial inspection and so on, but we had to use completely new computational methods to be able to recover page by page. For medical imaging, the challenge is that you would have to see through tissues. Unfortunately, terahertz are not are highly attenuated by water. And as you know, most of our body is water, especially tissues. And so it's difficult for terahertz to penetrate more than a few micrometers, in fact, through tissue. So all this is not directly useful for seeing through tissue. It could be useful for endoscopy because if you have to look through bones, or if you have to do inspections ex vivo, in those cases, medical imaging can be extremely powerful. So right now we're using terahertz imaging to, for example, look at quality of skin, where you might be using some pigments or new collagen and so on. We're also using terahertz to look at oil quality, or we're using terahertz to analyze rocks in oil exploration, because as you know, even though even whether you like oil as your fossil fuel as your source of energy, about 60% of about 60% of oil is not extracted because the processes are inefficient. So even if you can just do that, we will have twice as much oil to overcome some of these challenges. So overall, I think terahertz has a lot of possibilities in what we can do. But medical imaging may not be the best match right now.
So here's another question from one of our viewers. Sam in Florida asks, what's the startup culture like in India? How does it compare to Silicon Valley or Kendall Square?
Yeah, so that's just fascinating. I think it's a very unique place, very different, India and other emerging countries where I spend a lot of time. And I would say the relationship of technology, government, the society, and the financial institutions is very, very different in emerging worlds. I mean, a very small fraction of the population has credit cards or bank accounts. Disposable income is very low. So the solutions are very, very different. And so when we talked about taking MIT researchers to Kumbh Mela and looking at innovations there, it's not just about taking MIT technology and seeing if it's applicable there. In fact, most of the time it's not. You have to kind of modify it to do that. But often we see completely new set of challenges to come back and solve. One challenge we are working on right now is how do we assign a street address to every house? Because as you know, in most developing economies, there are no street addresses. The addresses are very informal, like behind this shop, next to this temple, and 10 steps away from this, and so on. And so creating a street address will completely transform, the insurance sector, e-commerce, citizen empowerment, and so on. So we're looking at all kinds of technologies to assign street addresses as an MIT project. But going back to about Silicon Valley or Boston versus India, it's very unique, and I encourage you to come on one of our future trips. Just go to mitredx.com, which is our platform to show. On your screen, you'll see REDX, Rethinking Engineering, Design, and Execution. And this is a new platform that we have built at MIT that allows anybody to plug in and see how we can do great work in emerging worlds.
I'm not sure they're seeing this yet. Anyway, we'll move on. There we go. There's the REDX.
So go to mitredx.com.
So here's a question from someone who may have been on the ground with you in India. John in India asks, will the iNetra be as accurate or more accurate as a regular autorefractometer? And does the patient have to be dilated?
That's a great question. John, so in fact, if you see all the clinical trials and all the clinical data that's disclosed on the iNetra website, the solution is actually more accurate than a traditional autorefractor. And the reason for that is an autorefractor, Judy, as you know, is a big device you may have seen. You put your eye through it, and the device does automatic measurement. The challenge with automatic measurement is that that particular day, depending on your mood, you may be following the instructions or you may not be following instructions. And your eye may be, whether you had your first cup of coffee or not, your eye may be focusing, on the right targets or not. And so the autorefractor is doing a whole bunch of measurements to get that. So it's not as accurate. On the other hand, when you're looking through this, we're asking you to do a very simple task of aligning lines. And so we have noticed that it's actually more accurate. In addition to that, iNetra has also released these other solutions to measure the power of your glasses. So if you can zoom in again on this thing, so you snap on your phone in one more thing, on this one more device called lensometer, and then you can take your prescription glasses and you can just slide it into this piece and click on a button, and it gives you the power of your lenses. And again, you can buy this online from inetra.com. And the benefit of this is that often when you go to see a optometrist, even though you will get a number, you may not want to, let's say your number is -2 and the optometrist gives you a number -4. You say, hey, I don't want to jump straight to -4 because my current prescription is -2. So maybe I'll just go to -3. And there's a particular formula they use to gradually bring you into your correct prescription. So you need another solution to actually also correctly measure your existing eyeglasses power. Again, devices like this cost tens of thousands of dollars because they have been based on something that's not portable and uses very high-end lenses and cameras. But again, this is one of the most amazing scientific instruments you're carrying around. It's crammed with all kinds of sensors, actuators, connectivity, displays. And one of my passion is how can we convert this mass use device into one of the most useful scientific instrument for us.
So I'm curious about that phone. That can't be used as a phone. It's just that you're using the hardware of the phone to do the work of iNetra.
Yes,
right?
yes. Judy, this can also make a phone call.
It can?
Remember those days? We used to make phone calls. This, in fact, can make a phone call.
I know, I'm a dinosaur. I still do, actually. So Jada in Connecticut asks, what is your biggest beef with current digital cameras? What is the low-hanging fruit that manufacturers of cheap cameras could do better? Yeah.
So as you know, we have kind of bifurcated the camera revolution. Either the point and shoot cameras have basically died, and you either use a cell phone camera or you use an SLR camera, right? And the middle ground has completely been lost, which of course is sad for somebody like me who does research on cameras. But it dawned on me a few years ago that even for consumers, we need to kind of move beyond the traditional needs, right? Instead of talking about how can we make the cell phone cameras as good as an SLR, that's like asking, can you build me a faster horse? And when we need just a car. So what has been happening, and through my research and many other collaborators and other companies, I think we're going to see that the camera phones will actually take a completely new direction and provide new experiences, new visual experiences that are far different from an SLR, but actually much more fun. And we're going to get these two completely new platforms. So go to my website. I recently gave a keynote on kind of new challenges and new opportunities with cameras.
So this is the last question I'm going to have time to ask, and we have only a minute or two to respond, so we'll have to be quick here. But Ziad in DC asks that you talk about the pilgrimage stampede during the Hajj last month and your impressions of what went wrong. All right.
It's very sad. In fact, when I was reading the news about stampedes, and by the way, this happens all over the world. It's not just Hajj. It's very unfortunate, and most of the reasons are predictable, somewhat manageable, but often you cannot test those things in advance, because every year the behavior of the crowds is slightly different. So it's very difficult for the organizers to predict what's going to happen. And that's why they need real-time information, as opposed to traditional solutions where you have barricades and you have pre-planned everything, assuming this is how individuals will flow during large gatherings. So I think technology has a big role to play. At Kumbh Mela, of course, it was without incidents. So a lot of credit goes to the local city officials for using technology in real time to provide that. And I hope MIT can play a big role in solving these big social challenges.
It sounds like that was a big leap of faith for the local officials.
Yes, you never know whether any solution you come up with is going to be successful, but I think that innovation and technology for real-time feedback is the future.
Thank you, Ramesh, on behalf of the MIT Alumni Association, for sharing your insights on your crazy ideas. I'm so glad you are doing that. And thanks to our viewing audience for joining us today. We encourage you to continue the conversation discussing these topics on our blog, The Slice of MIT, or on Twitter using the hashtag MIT Faculty. You can also view an archive of past faculty forums online by visiting the Learn section of the Alumni Association website. Please join us next month for another session of Faculty Forum Online.